incursion, hold short line. We spoke about a bunch of those things. And then we spoke about the unit 2, which was, what was the unit 2? Lost. We spoke about terminologies about being lost. We spoke about NDBs. What does NDB stand for? Non-directional beacon. What does ADF stand for, Umar? Without opening the book, what does ADF stand for? ADF. ADF. Automatic direction finder. What is RDF, Troy? You can come a little bit more forward if you want to make yourself comfortable. You're right in the back there? You can come a few more inches in the front if you want. What is RDF, sorry? Radio direction finder. What is VOR?
It's a very high frequency with
Very good. Very high frequency, omni, directional. Very good. Very high frequency, omnidirectional radio range. Can you repeat that? What is VOR?
Very high frequency, omnidirectional range.
Radio range. One last time. Can you repeat what is VOR? Very important. I want to make sure everybody knows it.
very high frequency omnidirectional radio range.
Perfect. What is the NDB? We've already said it, but I want to make sure you were listening. What is NDB? NDB. Yeah, non-directional. He just said it as well, and he just beacon. Very good. Non-directional beacon. Yes.
Can we also call it beam or
Beacon. Non-directional beacon. Beam. I don't see any textbook saying beam. No. All right. So we spoke about being lost, right? Troy? What is that track? What is an airway? Omar. Yep. And then we spoke about Unit 3, we spoke about technology, we spoke about a bunch of different terminologies, we spoke about ECAS. Hamad, what does ECAS stand for? EICAS. ECAS. EICAS. Indicating crew alerting system. Damien, describe what does ECAS have inside it. Abbreviation's done. Good job. Abbreviation's done. Don't tell me the abbreviation. Tell me a few examples or explanation on what does that ECAS have. Where is it? What is it? Just a few lines of explanation about ECAS. No idea. Moving on. You, sir. Other than the abbreviation, what else can you tell me about ECAS?
It's for engines presentation like the fuels.
Okay, so it has the fuel. I agree with that. So ECAS, I would have said, do you want to give it a try, Troy? Yeah, sure. But I'm looking at an answer saying ECAS is a part of the cockpit instruments. It's a panel or it's a part of the cockpit where it has a lot of different parameters. And the parameters, if you look at the PowerPoint presentation, you'll see parameters such as fuel, weight, oil pressure, oil temperature, pressures of different parameters in the engine. So all of those. So engine indicating crew alerting system. Something goes wrong with the systems. The fuel's running low. It will alert the crew. Does that make sense? So these are some of the most important things, ECAS. All right, we also spoke about when I was about to ask. That is radio. This is only about landing gear, down or up, cabin pressure, at what altitude is it, all of those information. So guys, you don't have to just go and read the abbreviation. I want you to look at every single line, look at every image, look inside the images and see what's inside the images, what type of information is on those images. Yep. So I already mentioned it a second ago, maybe a minute ago. Omar, what is RMP? I just said it like maybe less than 65 seconds, 70 seconds ago. RMP. Radio.
I don't know about panel. What is the
Hamad?
radio management panel?
Radio management panel. Even if you haven't studied last night, I just said it. You should be able to grasp it. Please, you guys need to focus more. This is what I expect you to talk about a few concepts on aviation English. The first one is, now we will talk about different types of aircraft. Now the word aircraft is a big concept with everything else inside it. So if you look at the word aircraft, it's not just an aircraft which is an airplane, right? You have the airplane, which is the fixed wing. So you've got the airplane, which is basically planes like these. fixed wings, we call them. That's an airplane. And then you've got the rotary wing. Helicopters are also called as rotary wing because they don't have a fixed wing, they have a wing which rotates. So your propellers are pretty much an aerofoil, which is exactly a wing which spins. So then we've got the fixed wing, and then we've got the rotary wing, right? We've got the rotary wing, and then you've also got gliders, aircrafts without engines. They have a fixed wing but no engine. You've got microlights, you've got gyrocopters. All of these are categories of aircraft. Is everybody okay with that? So now we're talking about this concept called as a gyrocopter. They come under the light aircraft category. You're not going to be flying gyrocopters as such for your pilot training, but you might be doing that for fun later on in your life, right? Very recently I flew around in some of these fun planes. A gyrocopter has some concepts of fixed wing and some concepts of a rotary wing. So if you notice, there's a helicopter look-alike thrusting device on the top. There's also a thrust creating device this way. So you've got thrust this way and this way. The physics is a little bit different. We're not going to study too much about them in detail, but I just want you to remember that this is a different category of aircraft called gyrocopter. Make sense? They have a combination of helicopter and airplanes. There's a bit of a fixed wing concept, but also has a bit of a helicopter concept. The next thing we'll be talking about is gliders. But in a glider, you could also have a hand glider. Now you could jump off a mountain cliff holding one of these, and the shape of the glider is supposed to be an aerofoil, technically, right? Nice and curvy above, the air goes faster above, slower below, creates high pressure below, low pressure above, keeping you in the air. Now, this device does not have any engine to create thrust. So the only amount of thrust you get is when you jump off the cliff and you run and catch some speed and you jump off. But then you've got gravity helping you, right? So when the gravity pulls you down, you don't go down this way, obviously. You go down this way. So when you are falling down under gravity with that angle, your speed increases. So you can increase your speed, get a lot of air going faster above, and create enough lift to stay in the air for a while. But this does not happen forever. Yes, you could stay for 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes depending on how good the winds are and how good you're skilled. You could stay in the air for a while, but eventually you are descending. And then sometimes you catch thermals. Thermal is a hot pocket of air rising up. Have you heard about thermals? If you know how to capture thermals, you could go over such areas where hot air is rising up, catch those air rising up, and that could give you a little bit of lift to stay up there for a while. So you could extend your flight for a few more minutes, stay in the air for a while, but eventually you are going to go down, and you better have a good, nice grass field somewhere in the vicinity where you're going to aim and go towards and eventually land. So this is a hang glider, but we also have proper gliders, which almost look like a two-seater aircraft, right? They don't have an engine. An actual aircraft which has an engine would tie a rope and take off, and the glider takes off with it. So basically it's a towing device. Once the powered aircraft goes up in the air at a certain altitude, obviously you're in communication, and you release that little cable, and now the glider is just doing the same concept, looking for thermals, doing circles, and eventually going in and landing. That is a glider concept. That is also part of the aircraft. Hot air balloon is also under the aircraft category. Blimps and the airships are also categories of aircraft, right? So, and when the propellers are simple, they are fixed at a certain angle. These propellers are fixed. But what if I want to get better performance out of your engines? Some of the high performance aircraft, some of the advanced aircraft, or some of the multi-engine aircrafts have the option for you to change the blade angle mid-air by moving the lever. Some of the smaller planes don't have it, and some planes have the option. And if you have the option, you'll normally see a green or a blue colored lever. So generally speaking, if you see the black lever, it's the throttle, right? The black lever is the throttle. The red lever is the mixture control that mixes the air and the fuel. But if you then see a blue or a green liver, most of the planes will have a blue liver. So this one, you see here, blue liver? This blue liver would be used to change the angle of the blades. By pushing the hydraulic liquid in, it changes the blade angle while the propeller is spinning at 2000 rotations per minute. The blade moves. By doing that, you can get the best performance for takeoff, best performance for cruise, and best performance for landing. Make sense? But generally, in the smaller planes you're going to start flying with, you're not going to have that. Any questions? So, we will then also talk about those fixed pitch propeller and variable pitch propeller. Let's keep moving. Now, I want you all to remember these three concepts. When a plane moves, it moves in three different dimensions, right? There is this movement going up and down. There is this movement and there is this movement. They all have a name. This movement of the plane in this dimension, so we have the X, Y and Z axis, right? So this movement is called as yaw, Y-A-W, yawing. This movement of the plane is called as rolling. And this movement is called as pitching up and pitching down. Everybody okay with that? So, this part of the tail is called as the elevator. This elevator moves up and down. The elevator moves up and down, which makes the plane go pitch up and pitch down. This surface is called as the elevator. The movement of the nose up and down is called as the pitch. When you roll the aircraft, this surface here and this surface here goes up and down. The ailerons, as we call it, this and this. When one aileron goes up and the other aileron goes down, the plane goes into a roll, right? And finally, so we're done with pitch, we're done with aileron, and then the rudder. This part of the tail is the rudder. The rudder moves this way, left and right, which makes the plane yaw to the left and right, very much like a boat. Boats have rudders, making them yaw to the left and right, same thing. So these are the three control surfaces. Rudder is a control surface. Elevator is a control surface. Aileron, here and here, is a control surface. By moving these, you can move the plane either in a roll, or a pitch, or a yaw. Everybody okay with that? So I'll ask you, what are the three control surfaces? It's called as the lateral axis. The axis controlled by your ailerons for your rolling is called as the longitudinal axis, which runs this way. This axis, which runs from the center of the nose to the back, is called as the longitudinal axis, making it roll. The vertical axis, yaw, which makes the plane yaw to the left and right, X, Y, and Z axis. You don't call it X, Y, and Z anymore. You call them the lateral axis, the longitudinal axis, and the vertical axis. You have to memorize this instantly. All right? Let's keep moving. Now, what is lift? Again, we're going to start a chapter called Principles of Flight after we finish the aircraft general knowledge. So we will talk about this concept for 5-6 days probably. But for now, I just want to do a soft introduction. The concept of lift is very simple. Lift is a force which creates a certain amount of energy to push you away from the weight which is pulling you down. So there's a weight force always pulling you down. Earth likes to pull everything towards the center of the earth, right? So you have to create a force equal to or more to be able to stay in the air. Make sense? Your plane has, let's say, 1000 kgs. There is a certain amount of force pulling down to keep it down. You have to create the force of lift which is more than the force of weight, and that force is lift created by your wings. And how do you create the lift? Very simple. Your wings happen to be the shape of a beautiful aerofoil, nice and flat below, gentle curve above. When the plane moves through the air on the runway, air goes faster above, slower below, creating a high pressure below and a low pressure area above, and that pushes the aircraft upwards. This force needs to always be created above your wings and below your wings as long as you're in the air. Until you touch the runway, until your tires touch the ground, you have to keep constantly creating this force. Everybody okay with that? Right, so I don't want to go into the details right now, but I will of actions, any set of movements, any set of coordinated turns and movements are called as maneuver. Climbing, pitching up is a maneuver. Doing a turn is a maneuver, right? So all of the actions are called as maneuvers, but then there are some restricted maneuvers which you don't do as a civil aviation pilot. You're not going to be doing any of these restricted maneuvers, which you'll have to either be in the Air Force or Red Bull races or any of the acrobatic flights to be able to pull these off. Not all smaller planes are capable of even doing these restricted maneuvers. If you pull out one of these Cessna 172s or a Diamond DA-40 or a Diamond DA-42 and you try to pull any of these restricted maneuvers, your plane will, well, it'll stall even before it does a full loop or a spin. Spins, yes, you could intentionally go into a spin, super dangerous. You should never put yourself in that scenario where it's going to be almost impossible to recover in some planes. So you've got to be very careful. Anyway, so the point is, this slide is not talking about the restricted maneuvers. This chapter or this slide is only teaching you the word maneuver. The word maneuver is basically any movement or a chain of movements which require a certain skill. Yep, you'll do S-turns around a highway when you're doing your pilot training. You'll do turns around a point when you're doing your pilot training. They're all called as maneuvers. So your instructor will tell you, let's go do the S-turn maneuver today. So, let's go practice the slow flight maneuvers today. So maneuver is anything which requires a certain skill and a bunch of actions. Now, the word airborne, maybe the picture is not. No matter what kind of problem you have, if you had a certain amount of altitude, you would definitely be able to solve the problem, no matter what the situation is. Engine shut down, 40,000 feet, no worries, I've got enough time to try to restart the engine, try to figure out what's the problem, turn on the fuel pumps, maybe it's a fuel starvation, maybe it's a vapor lock. I have enough time to figure it out, restart. I even have time to pull out a real physical book and try to understand what might have been gone wrong with the engine. I have enough time to even do anything and everything because I'm at a high altitude. So altitude is always your best friend. But fire, irrespective of how high you are, is your biggest enemy. You have any type of fire in your aircraft, that would be one of the worst type of emergencies you can think of, fire on board. So you have to do everything possible when you're building an aircraft, when you're flying an aircraft, when you're maintaining an aircraft, to not leave any place for fire. One of the worst type of fire, or one of the easiest way fires spread or start, even in buildings or in the aircrafts, are short circuits, right? So we're going to talk about short circuits, which is the reason why we have something called as these trip meters or these switchboards, trip switches. These are very much similar to your houses and all of your buildings. If there's a short circuit in this room, the entire floor will not lose electricity, correct? In fact, it will not even shut down the electricity for the entire office. It'll isolate the short circuit to that particular room, and the trip for that particular room shuts down. Make sense? Similarly, there is a trip, which is a switch, a brake switch for every single instrument. If you look at the names here, avionics master, COM 1, navigation 1, transponder, COM 2, audio panel, autopilot, stall warning, flaps position indicator. It's not the flaps. The flaps position indicator is a light or a device which shows you if the flaps are at 10 degree, 20 or 30 or 40. That indicator is a small light and a device that has a trip. If there's a tiny spark or a short circuit in any electrical device, it can easily catch fire, right? So we have to do everything possible to make sure that doesn't happen. Any guesses on what these numbers are? 5, 5, 5, 10, 15, 5. Anybody? What could that be? It's ampere. It's talking about its load capacity. If anything more than 5 amperes tries to go through that, it'll cut. The fuse will basically trip and melt. Make sense? So that is one of the most important things. So fire. When we speak about fire, we also have to worry about the big fires. For example, the aerial firefighting. As a commercial airline pilot, as a private pilot, as an instrument rated pilot, graduating from your fresh off the boat flight school, you cannot just go and jump in and do any of these crazy exercises, right? You haven't been trained for it. You have to do special ratings and special certifications before you can get involved in fighting fires and so on. Make sense? You cannot just take your private plane and go start throwing water outside your plane on a burning forest. You have to be very careful about these things. Now, we call them the galleys. This, why are we talking about this in the chapter about fire? Obviously, a lot of electronics, a lot of electrical heaters, you're making coffees, you're heating up food, so there's a lot of heat and a lot of electricity, maybe not the best combination, right? So there could be chances of having a lot of fires. This could be Mohammed, before I forget, we take some videos. Everybody's looking really sharp with the last one, and then we start with our aircraft generation and so on. Oh, this is taking forever. Okay, while it loads, what is EASA? It's in the PowerPoint presentations we spoke about. EASA. Amjad, can you try? Yes. What is the full form? European. Anybody? I didn't say Gulf.
No, I said, like, why wouldn't it be Gulf?
Why wouldn't it be Gulf? Because if it was Gulf, then it has to be for the entire Gulf, right? Saudi has something else. GACA, G-A-C-A. Oman has, I don't know what the full form is, please don't ask. PACA for Oman, PACA. GACA in Saudi, GCA in the UAE. Kuwait will be, I think Kuwait is Kuwait DGCA. Director General Civil Aviation. You know, so they all have a different name for their Ministry of Aviation. North America, US FAA, Federal Aviation, you know, and then, you know, every country has their own names. But they're all governed by the big ICAO guy, right? The ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, will have to manage them all. They are the superior authority who has to make sure that everybody is following all the basic rules and regulations, which cannot be changed. But guess what? YASA, CASA, FAA, all of these own different territories could be like, listen, I want to do something a little bit different in our country. A few things a little bit different is allowed with the approvals of the ICAO. But you cannot obviously create rules which goes against the very basics, such as two aircrafts approaching towards each other. Amjad, what do the two aircrafts do? They both go right. That obviously no such crazy important ones, obviously nobody can change. Anyways, let's move on. Now we're going to talk about the last unit of Aviation English and then start with aircraft general knowledge. This is going to be talking about metrology. Metrology is an entire subject. We're going to be talking about metrology for 3 days during the next 4-week program. But this metrology, I just want to throw in a few general topics and make sure that we are all on the same page. Now, the first word is microburst. This is a very, very scary thing. If you're scared of turbulence or if you're scared of a lot of other things in the air, don't be. Because there's a lot of other things to be scared of which definitely deserve your attention. Microburst is one of those really, really crazy ones. It is a very localized, a very tiny place where the air is going ridiculously high speeds downwards. So the air generally moves this way, right? Parallel to the ground. Sometimes the air is rising up, sure. But this is a localized column of air going crazy speeds downwards. I always love to give this example of, look at a housefly or a mosquito or an insect, yeah, flying towards a supermarket door. The supermarket doors open up when you go close to it, and as soon as the door opens up, that thick air is blowing down real hard. Have you seen them? Why do those turn on when the doors open? To keep the cold air in and to keep the hot air out. Number one reason. Number two reason, to keep insects from entering the door when the doors open. The insects are like, ooh, tomatoes and onions and, you know, all the fresh fruits inside. The doors open. A fly tries to enter that thick layer of invisible air, and that fly gets pushed downwards at crazy speeds and it doesn't allow it to enter the market. Make sense? Microburst is that crazy amount of columnized air, and our aircraft would be the size of a tiny little fly compared to the amount of air going down. Now this air is not going down throughout the city. It is like finding a needle in a haystack. You cannot really predict where these microbursts are going to happen. You can't be really sure when and where. Well, these days the scientists have tried to find some ways of predicting them, but it's not accurate. It's not always It's not always easy to find them. Couple of planes unfortunately have succumbed to this problem and they have had to go right through the microburst, invisible. You don't realize it until you're too late and you're inside it and you go slamming down to the ground, killing a lot of people. This has happened in a few incidences. That's exactly how it looks like, and it's the worst when you're taking off or landing. As I always tell you, your best friend is your altitude. If you had a microburst incident at 40,000 feet, you have enough time for the plane to react, add power, whatever, recover, turn left, right, whatever, and get out of it. But if that microburst happened very close to your pathway to your landing, you're 1,000 feet, 800, 700, poof, zero. You have no time to react. But if you were at a higher altitude, you would have enough time to react. So this has happened. A couple of airliners suddenly crashed a couple of kilometers before the runway when they were doing a beautiful approach with no reason at all. No clouds, no thunderstorms above right to you. So it's just clear air. Sudden air sinking downwards. Does that make sense? What do you do to avoid them? You pray that you don't encounter one. If you end up encountering one, if you have altitude, at full power, turn around, lots of things you can try to do. If you don't have any altitude and if that happens at 600, 800 feet, you know, one of the things I was wondering when I first saw the air, when it hits water droplets in the air, it comes back. So we're talking about Doppler effect, which is only sensing precipitation or water, moisture. So the Doppler effect can send radar signals through the cloud. If the cloud has very little moisture, it's not going to create a lot of rain and stuff, it doesn't get reflected back. If there's a lot of water droplets in the cloud, it gets reflected back, and that radar image shows, oh, there's a lot of water in that area, thunderstorm, and so on. But Doppler radars or the radar weather radars really cannot show you microbursts. Now, there are dry microbursts and wet microbursts. When there's a wet microburst, you see the water and the rain going through. That could easily be found on the weather radars. But unfortunately, there's also dry microbursts, which is super difficult. So, you know, it's one of those mysterious things. God has kept it for, you know, for us to figure it out yet. All right, so next topic is tailwind and headwind. If the wind is pushing you from the back, making you go super fast, tailwind, amazing for cruising. Once you go up at 30,000 feet or whatever, it would be amazing if you can click into regions with tailwind so that the plane gets pushed forward real fast. And you would reach your destination a lot more quicker. Without a lot of fuel, you can reduce the amount of fuel being burnt, reduce the amount of engines being burnt, and still go at a decent speed. But the opposite would be true if you had headwinds. You now have to cut through the headwinds and the resistance, and it's slowing you down. So you'll have to now add more engine power, more fuel, or risk reaching half an hour late or 1 hour late, right? So airlines love to look at paths where there is going to be a lot of tailwinds. Now, tailwinds are deadly during takeoff and landing. Everybody knows this, right? You cannot take off with tailwind. You cannot land with tailwind. You have to always land into the wind with a headwind, because that's when the air goes faster above, slower below, creates lift, right? So when you're flying up at the cruise level, sure, headwinds will make you reach your destinations faster. But when you are taking off or landing, you have to take off into the wind and you have to land into the wind. Please remember that. We'll obviously talk about them in more detail when we start talking about principles of flight. You'll have math questions, mathematical question time. I'll give you questions this Friday. You'll have 2 exams this Friday. One is that math paper. I already gave you all samples. Mohammed, I'll give you. Please remind me after class. You all have 2 different types of math papers. One with the staple, one without the staple. Without the staple, the simple 2 pages. That's the one you'll be doing as a test this Friday. And you'll also do an entire aviation English test. All the 6 PowerPoint presentations. Unit 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6. Based on all of those 6 on Friday, you will do a test, 15 minutes. For the Aviation English, 1 question, 4 options, and some questions will be empty space for you to write physically. During your final exams, it will all be 1 question, 4 options, but during the unit tests in the end of the week, every week, I'll keep intentionally some questions for you to physically write and explain. Yep. All right, moving on. So you'll get a question like this. If your airspeed is 100 knots with a tailwind of 30 knots, what's your ground speed? 100 plus 30, 130. But if your airspeed is 100, but you're getting a headwind of 30, your ground speed will be minus that number, right? 100 minus 30, 70. Everybody okay with that? These type of questions, again, your airspeed is 500 with a tailwind of 100 becomes 600 ground speed. If your airspeed is 500 but a headwind of 100 becomes minus 400 ground speed. All okay with this? Now, landing short of runway. This is what is happening when you are experiencing, for example, a lot of problems. But let's say this. You see, this plane was supposed to go in and land maybe here, well into the runway. Because of a ground effect or because of whatever effect, because of any reason, if the plane touches the ground much before the runway, we call this landing short of runway. It does not mean you're landing on a tiny runway. It doesn't mean you're landing on a short runway. Landing short of runway, again, the chapter is Aviation English terminologies, correct? So I'm only explaining you these words because once I start teaching you all the real chapters, I'm going to be throwing in these words and I don't have time to stop and explain them. So when I say the word, the plane has landed short of the runway, it means the plane has landed before the runway started. The plane's coming in, plane's coming in, plane's coming in. He's supposed to land at the first two white markers. By the way, runways start from this point. You can take off, you can start your takeoff roll from this point. You can start from the edge of the runway at full power and use the entire runway to take off, no problem. But when you're coming in for landing, you are not allowed to touch on the tip of the runway. Let me draw and show you what I mean. There is something called as a threshold of the runway. So that is the physical part where the runway starts, all right? Yep. Now here you'll see white lines. Have you seen them? We call them the threshold. Technical name, threshold of the runway. Common word used by a lot of non-aviator, piano keys. Because they look like the keys on the piano, black and white, black and white, black and white, right? So these lines, this area is called as the piano keys or the threshold, depending on what you want to call them. You are not allowed to come and land on that area. You're never allowed to land on that area. It's the threshold. But guess what? If a taxiway is connecting here, sure, you can come in and you can start your takeoff roll by using every inch of the runway. That's fine. You can't touch down here. You have to aim for the first white marker. You see those two white markers on every runway? You see that? The first one, that's the second one. That's the first one. You have to aim to land there if you are doing an instrument approach. But if you are landing using VFR, PPL rules and so on, you can even land on the numbers. There's a runway number. Runway 7, runway 6, runway 5. So you can aim to land on the runway number. That's fine. But if you're flying instrument rating, you have to touch down at the first 1,000 foot marker. So there is a first 1,000 foot which you're not allowed to land in.
What is the reason?
A lot of ILS signals take you all the way down there. If you're following an ILS landing system, it takes you there. Also, you don't want to touch at the beginning of the runway because that means you might be touching the fence of the compound wall of the airport. Do you see what I mean? You'll be too shallow of an approach. For a lot of reasons, that's an extra space given for not touching down, but you can use it for takeoff. If you're landing on the other side of the runway, you can take the entire runway and stop yourself until this point. That's fine. But if you're taking off, you can use it, sure. But when you're landing on this side, you have to land at the number if you're a VFR pilot, or you have to land at the first 1,000 foot marker if you're an instrument pilot. Yeah, we'll get in that topic in detail. Operations and procedures chapter will talk about all of these things. So the word landing short of runway, what does that mean? The word landing short of runway means I have landed before the runway has started, earlier of the runway. If I land here on the threshold, you're not allowed to, but that's not called as landing short of the runway. Do you see what I mean? If you land before the runway in the grass or the sand or whatever, before the actual black tarmac of the runway is called as landing short of the runway. Any questions, guys? All right, now glide path. This is super important. The path which you are using to go in for your landing is called as glide path. Generally, it should be a nice and gentle 3-degree glide path. Please write it down. Your GP, your glide path should generally be a nice little 3-degree approach. A nice, gentle, straight line without ups and downs as you see here. Now, your desired glide path is this nice and straight line. And if you're a horrible pilot, you'll be doing that wavy line as you see. Now, imagine if you're doing this all the way to your runway. That means either the winds are troubling you or you are a horrible pilot yourself or whatever the reason is. Do not go and touch down on the runway with that kind of an approach. Snaking throughout the approach, you're unstable. You're not ready for the landing. You'll hurt yourself. Go around. Full power, pitch up, go. Make a steady approach. Make sure that, have you seen planes when they're coming in? Have you felt the planes doing that ever in approach? Sometimes? Wow, okay. Right? So either winds or something's wrong, or maybe it's not the pilots, maybe it's the winds. So maybe sometimes it goes like that, and then because maybe the winds, but I want you also to know why that can happen. Sometimes the pilot is unable to correct it well, but I want you to remember when you come closer and closer to the ground effect, the effect of the winds are very, very brutal. The air at higher altitudes are a lot more stable. The air more closer to the ground is a lot more disruptive because it's hitting the mountains, it's hitting the trees, it's hitting the houses, the buildings, the airport facilities. All that makes the air very unpredictable. They're just going in any random way because they're hitting each other. Make sense? So there's a lot of turbulence close to the ground. But also very important is if you are flying over a tiny little lake and then suddenly you're flying over a city and you're approaching, water bodies are much cooler. The air is generally sinking down over cooler bodies, lakes, rivers, whatever. But then if you have a hot pavement, which means like very concrete jungle, a lot of tar roads and highways and city limits and releasing all the heat, those areas the air is rising up. Thermals, remember thermals I told you when I spoke about gliders? The thermals going up will push the air automatically up. It's not that the pilot is lousy and he's doing this sneaking approach. He wants to go perfectly straight. But guess what? He was trying to go straight. The warm ground, the city, maybe he was flying over a massive city. Smoke and heat and all that made the plane rise up a little bit. Now, he tried to correct it by pushing it down, and suddenly he's now flying over a lake. And the lake, already the air above the lake is sinking down. So that now a good pilot knows what to expect. He looks at his approach and is like, all right, okay, I'm flying from here to there. There's a lake in between, but there's a lot of cities in between. Okay, so while I'm flying over the cities, it'll keep me a bit higher. So I'm going to pitch it down. And even before I touch the lake, I'll start pitching up because my plane will tend to go down. And you have to plan that and make sure you still go perfectly straight. You have to plan what's in front of you, what type of terrain you're going to be flying. Warm ground will make you rise up a little bit. Cool areas or water bodies will make you go down, and hot pavements again. And then by the time you touch the runway, you may land short of the runway or you may land much ahead of your landing point if you don't plan for it. All okay with this concept? Omar? Yep. Next, overcast. This is a very simple terminology. Covering of your sky with clouds. You can't see the sun. Basically, very depressing weather, right? Or depends on which part of the world you're in. If you're fed up of 50-degree heat, maybe that is beautiful weather, right? So, depends on the perspective. People who live in those countries with overcast of clouds all the time, they say it's a very depressing weather and they're running away to places like here. But people like us in June, July, 2 weeks of my vacation. I came back on Sunday afternoon. As I said, I'm still reeling back from my vacation drag. And beautiful clouds. I didn't see the sun for 2 weeks. Lots of rain. Loved it. Overcast is the terminology used for the way how the sky is covered with clouds. Make sense? Wind shear. This is a terminology. Again, we'll study the whole chapter of meteorology in detail. But the word wind shear is when, please write down two things. When the wind is moving at different speeds in different directions. Or one of those two. When the big mass of air, one big mass of air is moving this way, another mass of air is moving the other way. That is wind shear. Or sometimes the one big piece of mass of air is moving in a certain speed. The other big piece of air mass, again, this is a big mass of air I'm talking about. 50, 100 kilometers, massive, massive. I'm talking about major, big areas of wind moving. Does that make sense? I'm not talking about like a little bit of wind. Big masses of air moving in different directions and different speed is called as wind shear. Now, well, even if it's small amounts of air moving, in between the two different directions of the wind, you'll have wind shear. If you're flying in an area where this side the wind is going this way, this side the wind is going that way, you'll be stuck in a very horrible position in between them. Never get stuck in between two masses of air because you will experience wind shear. Does that make sense? Let's talk about, that brings us to the end of our slide. All right, good job everybody. Done with meteorology, aviation English. And now we will start with aircraft general knowledge. Yep.